just do a song called Ghost in My Bedroom. And I don't know what it's going to sound like because I've never even opened my eyes this early for like a very long time. So I don't know what my throat's going to do. But it's basically, it's nice because I don't get to play it a lot because I don't really play it in a gig setting. But it's kind of just exploring the relationship my mental health has with my parents. Really interesting. So yeah, this is called Ghost in My Bedroom. Mama told you not to be a selfish girl. Mama told you go wash your hands. So how does the picture look, the moral stand, when you first lit that cigarette? Mama told you not to wish on miracles. Can't change the world with a note in the sand. You can close your eyes and wish the words would come to life. Just please don't bury your head. Then there's me and all the things I do, many ways I ran away from you. I can't help it, there was a ghost in my bedroom, and she wouldn't let me talk to you, and she scarred my arms and sent me to the bottle while she built a replacement. Here I am. And so here I am in all of my glory, and the wicked thoughts and fears still intact. And Mama, I did all the things you warned me not to. Fell in love with a forbidden plan, and got all the things I hid from you. Wasn't sure if you would want me to spill my guts on your new dining room table. Are you ready, set, going down? Tell it all, won't leave the gory out. 'Cause I finally faced the ghost, held her hand. Here I am. Here I am. And Mama, I did all the things you warned me not to. Fell in love with the forbidden plan.
Good morning, everybody. Are we all good today? Still asleep? Molly, are you awake yet? Still waiting for the coffee to kick in? Well, look, there's nothing like the fear of public speaking coupled with a healthy dose of imposter syndrome and the feeling that you've eaten an entire bag of butterflies to have you feeling this alert on a Monday or Friday morning. So I definitely don't need the coffee. For those that I haven't met yet, my name is Caroline Foran. I'm a journalist and I'm the author of Owning It, which is all about anxiety and essentially how to make work for you rather than against you. It's been doing pretty well since it came out, which I guess has a lot to do with the fact that we are all more consistently stressed out, anxious, and overwhelmed than ever before. The struggle is real. So when I was first asked to come here this morning and speak with you, I assumed they had the wrong email address because the theme, as you can see, is genius. So this was my reaction. Well, I'm not a genius, and if I could give a talk on how to be one, I wouldn't be here because I would obviously be a millionaire. So if you've come here today expecting that, I'm really sorry. You're going to be bitterly disappointed. So I scratched my head for a long time about how I would interpret this word genius. Didn't really come with anything for a while. I thought about Einstein and Mozart and Da Vinci and all those talented bastards, and frustrated, I decided, you know what, I don't really like the word. For me, it refers to the possession of something that for most of us is unattainable, a measure we might never reach, and in trying to reach it, the good stuff in my life passes by. For me, it makes us aware of what others are and what we are not, and what good comes from that. From what I've read, being a genius is a cultural convention, and as seems to be the case, you're only labelled as such if society says so. So it's about what other people think of you rather than how you value yourself, and I don't think that's any way to live. The term genius makes me feel pressure to have some brilliant idea or be the best I can be, and I think I'm doing just fine, and I think we're all doing just fine as we are. So this whole idea of being your best self, if I can just get a show of hands for how many of you have read an article or a book in the last few weeks that tells you how to be your best self. Okay, so how to be your best self at work, your best self in your relationships, your best and funniest self on social media, your best self at the gym, even your best self while you sleep with those fucking sleep pillow sprays. The list goes on and on and on, and it's exhausting, so I'm just like, go away. There is a constant stream of messaging coming at us from every angle, telling us how to be better at every aspect of living, while at the same time get really good at taking care of ourselves. We're told to lean into our careers and get the promotion, but not so far that we fall flat on our face, which was kind of my experience, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. So while it's a positive thing that we're more aware of our well-being these days, and thankfully it's no longer seen as a badge of honour to burn yourself out at work, we can thank Ariana Huffington for that, wellness, I worry, for lots of people is in danger of becoming yet another thing to tick off your to-do list each day, another thing to be good at, and if I'm not nailing it like everybody else seems to be, it's another thing to stress about. Well, and sorry for the curse, fuck that. We all want to improve, but a bit like our renting situation in Ireland at the moment, it's coming at too high a price. I got to a point in trying to be my best self that if I didn't, I'll get rid of him now, he's too distracting. If I didn't get my 5 minutes of mindfulness in a particular day, or I didn't have a shot of wheatgrass, I would be annoyed at myself. I had overdosed on wellness, even taking on ridiculous meditation challenges that just didn't suit me. And while it was well intended at first, it backfired, leaving me more wound up than when I'd started. I even felt like that mindfulness app icons on my phone were judging me for not doing enough. And just logging onto the Mind Body Green website, which I loved, where there was 30-odd articles a day, telling me how to be my best self in all these different ways, it just sent me into orbit. But of course, that mentality defeated the whole purpose. But it's easy to see how that might happen, and it's easy to see why a counter-resistance to this hot new way of living would emerge. For me, it just fueled the anxiety that I was trying so hard to get a handle on. Now, when people hear that I've written a book about anxiety, they assume that something horribly traumatic must have brought it on, or I had a near-death experience, but to be honest, it's kind of a dull story. There was no isolated trigger. I had no near-death experiences, and despite having everything I needed in life, which I did, I just kind of fell apart. And where other lumps of coal might do well under pressure and turn into diamonds, and I'm sure there's plenty of you here, I turned to rubble. So my parents will tell you that I've always been a bit of a worrier. And if I was ever stressed, I'd feel it really physically. And at the time, before this all hit me, I was in a great job that I loved. But I had reached a bit of a plateau. There was nowhere really else for me to go in the company. And when I looked at others around me, I felt that I needed to keep pushing myself, otherwise I might get stale. And I was really hard on myself. So I leaned into a new job that just wasn't right for me, while at the same time moving house, which in itself is kind of stressful. And just as I realised deep down, way down here, that maybe I'd made a terrible mistake on the job front, the anxiety manifested itself first in my digestive system, so I was just crippled with pain. And then after a while of trying to just ignore that and pretend like, it would be okay, It was just roaring at me with violent panic attacks on a daily basis. I didn't understand it, and I was barely even able to label it as anxiety. I thought this has to be something else, like a new food intolerance, because I'm kind of allergic to everything. But understanding anxiety, what it is, why we feel it, and where it comes from is honestly half the battle. It's so much a part of getting to a point of owning it. And I go through this in so much greater detail in the book. But what made things worse, when I was already feeling shitty enough, was looking around at everybody else and seeing how seemingly good they were at coping with stress, especially those who had an awful lot more to be stressed about. I suppose I just felt like I didn't have a good enough reason, a right to feel the way I was feeling. And at the time when this happened to me, we weren't really at the point yet of discussing mental health. I mean, we're not quite there yet. We've got a long way to go, but we're certainly on the right track. And where today we might go into work and say, oh, I have a banging headache, I feel like shit, I might go home. It just didn't feel safe enough to say, do you know what, I'm not sure I can cope mentally today, I'm feeling very overwhelmed. And it still feels risky to say we don't feel okay mentally. And I get asked about this a lot, like where that stigma came from with physical health versus mental health. And for me, I think the stigma arose from the idea that a physical ailment, such as a stomach bug, is something that happens to you and is, beyond your control. Whereas we control our minds. So if we're struggling up here, we're out of control and we're crazy. And people used to think that you might catch craziness. So that's crazy. And the fact that the physical and the mental are inextricably linked is just taking a really long time to catch on. Instead, and this is such an Irish thing in particular, we just get on with things like this fella here, put the head down, get a grip, earn our stripes, which I was trying to do. And as older generations might tell you, sure, didn't your grandparents walk to school in their bare feet in the snow? And didn't we have nothing to worry about in the grand scheme of things? And they were right to an extent, but still I couldn't function and I wasn't a snowflake. So things were really horrible for a while. I couldn't work and I got really ill and I cried all day, every day, while I berated myself for not being strong enough to just snap out of it and get a grip like everybody else seemed to be doing. As for what eventually worked for me, and still works for me to this day because I still feel anxiety all the time, especially this morning, I'd have to keep it all day, so I'll be brief. Honestly, it took about a year to start feeling even a little bit like myself again. I threw everything at my anxiety at first, trying desperately to get over it, as though it was something that had possessed me. And to be honest, if I could have done an exorcism, and I thought that might help, I would have done it. But trying to cure it so that I never had to feel it again was making things worse, and I think that's where so many of us go wrong. What helped hugely, and this sounds easier than it is, was accepting it. So just letting it happen and being okay with the fact that I feel anxious today, I might feel anxious tomorrow, I might feel anxious in future. It's not something to get over like a bad flu. It's not something foreign that has taken control of you. It's such a natural response, and it's just something to manage. I mean, don't get me wrong, it still felt really shit when I had panic attacks. But in time, it took a lot of the fear out of the fear, and then a lot of the anxiety dissipated. I was kind of, over time, creating the hormones and the biology of a calmer disposition, and it really did work. So I got better at recognizing it, and I informed myself on how our bodies work and how stress works, and all those different hormones involved. And I went about addressing it in a much more practical and realistic way with things like cognitive behavioural therapy, which I can't speak highly enough of, and acupuncture, which helped calm those very physical symptoms. Because I was waking up in the morning with aches and pains all over my body from the tension of just holding myself so tight. But most of all, just being really nice to myself. I stopped thinking of it as the worst thing ever or the enemy, and I changed my perspective on it. And eventually, this had a massively positive influence on my body's stress response. I stopped denying my mental health difficulties and I decided to just own it, which is where the title of the book comes from. My technique to this day is still to assess and address our anxiety. So to assess, we're looking at the bigger picture of why we're here, why we're feeling this way, because it's not always that obvious. You might wake up feeling really anxious and you can't put your finger on what it is. And usually if you take a kind of a helicopter approach and step back, you can put together the pieces and figure out what got you here. And it might be something it might seem insignificant, but it's just how your body reacts. And reminding ourselves of what's happening in our bodies, and then to address, which is where we're turning to those tools and techniques that we know will work for us. At around the same time that I started to really suffer with anxiety, I guess more and more of us, I didn't realize there was more people like me, but we were all starting to feel the effects of trying to overachieve. And so with the rise in anxiety came the rise in wellness, in this wellness industry. It quickly became a trend, and thanks in large part to social media, it became a bit of a bandwagon to either jump on or get left behind. And for me, where things got dodgy is that it offered us yet another metric of social comparison. So no longer was it about how much you make or how good you are in work or how good your relationships are or how deadly your holiday photographs are. It was also how good you are at managing all of those variables. Which was meant as the antidote became part of the problem. Social comparison there. Social comparison is a biggie, and it's something that we all do, and we've always done it, but social media has made us experts at it. We keep up with the Joneses as a way of making accurate evaluations about ourselves, and we stack ourselves up against others as a way to measure our own self-worth. And while this can be motivating in small doses, it just doesn't always work out that way, and it's a habit that we all have that's tinged with discouragement. You see, for me, there's a very fine line between spurred on by those around you and winding up in a perpetual cycle of self-doubt. An example, which I'm all too familiar with, maybe you will be too, would be waking up first thing in the morning, scrolling through Instagram and seeing that someone you follow has already been to a yoga class and arranged their porridge to look like a work of art in a bowl. Meanwhile, you or me came home drunk last night and forgot to take your makeup off. So you haven't even gotten out of bed yet and already you've dropped the ball. But what you're not seeing when you look at your peers on social media is a sleepless night they might have had that we don't know about due to other stresses that led to them being up at 5 a.m. to make their bloody sunrise yoga class. You're comparing your behind the scenes with someone else's highlights reel, and the information that you're using to measure your own success with, thanks to filters like the Valencia filter, is more inaccurate than ever. Look, there are so many things that cumulatively bring about anxiety in our everyday lives. For one, sugar and caffeine, sorry, coffee angel, is worth being wary of. But social comparison, made all the easier with social media, is a major culprit. If you're already feeling particularly vulnerable or anxious and you go on a social media binge, and I hope I'm not the only one who's been there, you might notice that your self-worth nosedives while your anxiety shoots right up. And in fact, social comparison theorists go so far as to say that our drive to compare ourselves to others is almost as powerful as our drive for thirst or hunger. So instead of trying to be like someone else who seems to be winning at life, we need to try to stop trying. Now, I don't want to be too negative on a Friday morning. So what can we do that's actually going to give us a true sense of wellness? What can we do that won't add more fuel to the fire that we're trying to put out? Well, before you go booking yourself in for another yoga class or cutting out gluten, give yourself a goddamn break, please. If you're having a shit week, that's okay. Roll with it. If you've lost count of your macros, I've never been able to count my macros, don't beat yourself up about it. If your plan A doesn't work out, there's 25 more letters in the alphabet before you run out of options. Allow yourself to lick the bowl when you're baking, or hit the snooze button, or squeeze in an extra episode on Netflix when you really should be organising your pantry or some shit. Decide what being well means to you, and don't let any trend or article tell you otherwise. It doesn't have to include matcha lattes, which were created for me for only Satan to drink. And there's Jim Carrey. They're horrible. I mean, even people are drinking them out of fucking avocados now. So for one person, it might well be yoga at 4 a.m. Well, for me, that would be just pure torture. For me, it's not feeling guilty about maybe having a glass of Prosecco on a Tuesday, God forbid, or buying new pajamas in Pennies when I already have 2 wardrobes full of them at home. It might be getting out in nature and going for a hike for one person, or it might be having the most indulgent duvet day for another. But whatever you do to mind yourself, here's a new idea. Keep it under your hat. This is perhaps the best advice I've ever been given for self-fulfillment, and it's from The Rules of Life by Richard Templer, which isn't as preachy as it sounds. So just take one thing that you do for you to keep your head above water, and keep it just for you. I myself am guilty of mirroring my every waking move on social media, and while there's nothing wrong with it, I'm trying to pare it back. It's become a knee-jerk reaction where if I do something such as bake a healthy banana bread, it hasn't really happened until I've posted about it on social media and got a hit of likes. And this whole idea of if it's not on social media, then it didn't happen is just crazy. You're not looking after your physical and mental health for social media, or at least you shouldn't be. And you're not doing it for the likes or the surge of gratification that we all get when random people see that we've done something good. That is a surge we're all familiar with. And it's so dodgy that we go there for gratification. It's a bit like a drug. But you're not doing it for them, you're doing it for you and only you. You might motivate someone else, but you also might make someone else who's feeling vulnerable feel like shit. And your feeling well is not defined by other people. So do the things that give you satisfaction because they give you satisfaction. Make sure it's what you're doing that makes you feel good and not the likes for doing what you're doing that makes you feel good. Look at your own social media habits and your own habits of social comparison and just tread carefully. Enjoy it, I do, but be aware that a lot of it is bullshit. I think we all know this. Observe those moments when you fall down that rabbit hole of comparing yourself to others, and without giving yourself a hard time, try to just pare it back bit by bit. What might be a healthier option is what theorists call temporal comparison. So naturally, look, we're going to want to take stock of how we're doing in order to grow and move forward, and we all want to do that. It's just in our nature. But instead of using other people as your yardstick, look at yourself. So it's more about self-reflection versus social comparison. It's a lesser-known theory, but it's a lot more positive. So instead of comparing yourself to your peers, compare yourself today to yourself in the past, be it last week, yesterday, last year. Don't involve anyone else in the picture and be your own motivation. Because by focusing on ourselves alone, it shifts our thinking from one-upmanship, which is very much anxiety-inducing, to positive and practical self-improvement. And so I came back around to this whole idea of genius that boggled me so much at first. And the idea of creative genius and those in history, those men and women onto whom we've awarded this esteemed title retrospectively. I'm happy for them, it's great, but I'm not going to try and be one. And while I cannot relate to a genius, and I'll probably never compose a symphony or paint the next masterpiece, perhaps there are smaller ways I and we all can learn from them. What do they all have in common? Well, across the board, they did what felt right for them, not what others said they should do. They went at their own pace. They thought independently, and they rode on their own bandwagon. They certainly weren't scrolling through Instagram and comparing themselves with other potential geniuses and seeing how many followers they had. They embraced self-doubt and uncertainty because I guarantee you they never felt like geniuses, and I'm sure a good lot of them were riddled with the imposter syndrome that crippled me this morning. They allowed themselves to have plenty of shit ideas and lots of off days too. They were far from the perfect, well-balanced beings we're all trying to become, and they certainly indulged in life's pleasures from time to time. They were their own yardstick, and this is the most important thing, seeking only to better themselves and not by measuring themselves against others. And from this came their best work, and from that will come our best work. And on a side note, apparently they were all as mad as a bag of spiders, which inspires me to embrace imperfection. So, if this is what it means to be a genius, well, it might not be as elusive as we've been led to believe. Thank you.